We should be live now. So, welcome. If you guys are watching, welcome to week 64 of Supercharge Fridays. How is everybody? Come in the comments. It's great to be here on Friday. And we have someone really special today to talk about what? Creativity. Particularly if you think, yeah, creativity, it's not for me, I'm not creative. Yeah, we're going to challenge that assumption. And we have Stefano Di Lollo, who has come back. He was on this live stream, I think May 2020. I think you were there then. So it's been almost a year, and you're one of the few people I've asked to come back. So, very warm welcome, Stefano, to Supercharge Fridays.
Thank you so much. It is great to be here. I mean, first off, it's great to see you and to engage with your audience, but it's also topics that I absolutely love with all of my heart. And you know how I feel about creativity and how I love to let it seep into everything that we do. And so I'm hoping that people will see that opportunity to question, how could I be more creative in my job search?
Exactly.
And in anything else, quite honest.
In anything else, exactly. There's a lot of myths that I'd like you to bust with us today. And we have like so much stuff to talk about. I see that we've had tech issues lately, but I see that everything is fine. So it looks good. So fantastic. So Stefano, before we get started, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about yourself and, briefly explain to us your journey up till date, because you've had quite a journey, particularly for those who are not familiar with you or your work.
Yeah, well, it's always interesting to reflect back on one's journey. I actually started my career in product design, also known as industrial design, where my job was quite literally to solve problems and generate, products that would solve these problems. And it was great fun because you get to understand people and you get to understand their struggles, and you put that into practice. Now, of course, I was using my creativity and developing my creativity. And as my career progressed, I started to realize that, there was a lot of benefits to helping other people around me be more creative. And so my work started to transition. And of course, I started to take on leadership roles where I was helping my teams collaborate and also helping cross-departmental collaborations. And then, of course, that spawned into a consulting career where I would go into organizations and help their teams be more creative, more impactful. And of course, I always felt that there was something else missing. And I never ran into someone who had really no capability to be creative or come up with ideas, but rather it was how they were thinking about their creativity and how they were thinking about their thinking, which dives into leadership and coaching, which is kind of what brings me to this point today. And often people recognize me for my artistic work that I've done in the past, but the truth is I am doing the most creative work of my life right now, working with people and getting them to be creative so that they can reach their full potential.
I love that, because there's assumptions we have about things related to creativity. And a lot of those assumptions are coming from very specific limiting beliefs, Stefano. So, and I want to challenge them. And I love what Jeff said. Hey, Jeff, he's in Ohio. It's difficult for left-brainers like me to be creative. Of course, it's possible. And Risto's asking if you're because Risto, we met through Coacharya, which is where we've done our coaching from.
Yes.
How I got to know Stefano. And Risto's wondering if you're going to be pulling a few strings today, because he remembers last time.
The few strings, Risto, very good memory. I love that. That means it either left an impact or you just reviewed it very recently. But thank you for bringing that up. And of course, I always pull strings.
It definitely left an impact. What I'm going to do is at the end of the live stream, I'm going to link that live stream because that was very special. I received, I kid you not, dozens and dozens of comments and messages related to that. So we're gonna check that out. And a very warm welcome to all of you who are coming in today. It's lovely to have you here. Good morning, Dan. It's 5 a.m. for you in California. I love that you making the effort to join us. So, Stefano, you are going to hear this a lot. We all hear this a lot. Like, what are you talking about, Stefano and Sonal? Like, I am not creative. I am just not the type.
Yeah.
type. Okay. What do you say to that?
Yeah. Well, this is what I hear the most often. It's the number one thing that people will say. And even people who know me well and know my beliefs, and they'll still say it. And, I'll ask why. So tell me more about why you think you're not creative. And they'll make some reference to, I can't even draw a stick figure.
Yeah.
And my question that will be, what in the world does that have to do with being creative? That just means you can't draw a stick figure. And the first rule, the first myth to debunk is everyone is creative.
Yes.
And I will show you an example of something that I am working on because I believe this so strongly. I've had to actually create a prop, and it's not done yet, but I've literally created a stone tablet, and it says rule number 1. I don't know if you could see, and I'm writing everyone is creative. And
Yes.
I'm going to kind of hold this up almost though it is written in
my
stone
God.
by some greater power, because we need to remind ourselves that to be human by default means to be creative.
Yes.
And people often bring up AI, and even, AI is a great thing, a great industry, but I am not worried about AI being creative, because you need to have emotions and experiences. You need to be truly human to be creative. So rule number 1, there is no such thing as not being creative. Now, what I will do is I will offer a little bit of context. You can look at academic literature and find proof of different levels and models and theories that show that there are different levels of creativity.
Yeah.
In fact, there are 2 research, Beghetto and Kaufman, who wrote this great piece called The 4 C's of Creativity. And they define these 4 levels.
Yeah.
What's interesting about these 4 levels is when you understand that there are these 4 levels, you can have a better idea of, oh, right, I'm always comparing myself to the 4th level.
And that is the assumption that a lot of us, including what Jeff said about the left brain, that's what we are talking about, right?
Correct. Look, I don't know enough about the right and left. I've read all of those books. So far, I have yet to find actual documentation that specifies that we actually know for a fact that there's one side of our brain doing, certain types. There's actually probably an intermingling of both of those sides.
Yep.
And so really, I think more powerful thinking is, how am I thinking about my own creativity? And what will I do to maybe stretch that muscle? I have my mug here. I showed it to you a little earlier.
Please show it. Please show it to everybody. This is. I have to say this before you start, Stefano.
Yeah.
Stefano is the king of props and metaphors and bringing it to life. And if you don't follow, I highly recommend that you follow Stefano on Instagram. He's great on LinkedIn. I feel like his genius is a lot more documented in one place on Instagram. If you don't follow him, you're just missing out. That's all I'm going to say. And tell us about this mug, because again, it is helping us to clarify.
Yeah, well, look, I created this because it's an emoji, but of course I turned the strong arm into a brain there, because it reminds me, and I use this to remind other people that, we all have biceps. But that doesn't mean that everybody has worked on them to the point where they can now, flex that bicep and show it off.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what will you do to stretch this muscle? Because creative ability, this higher order thinking, is really nothing more than something that you just need to practice and stretch and flex. And it will continue to, develop within you in your way. So there's no point in me comparing myself to Michelangelo.
Yeah.
In fact, I always found this interesting. If we were to go back to Renaissance times and start speaking of creativity, no one would know what we were speaking about, because that concept wasn't introduced until the 60s.
Oh, 1960s.
Yeah, when they started to do research and they started to make links to psychology and investigate what creativity truly meant, this was a term that became popular in the 60s. It emerged a little earlier than that. But if we were to walk up to Leonardo da Vinci and say, tell me more about what's the source of your creativity, he'd probably be like, no capito, scusa, what? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Creativity was often referred to something that was, first of all, it wasn't called creativity, but it was often something that was godly, that actually wasn't possessed by human beings.
Divine.
It was divine. It was divine, a divine gift. And even the word genius, which eventually somewhat developed from this thinking, the concept of genius was something that everybody possessed, almost like a guardian angel. And genius wasn't meant to define or label a specific individual, but rather we each had our own genius. There was another term, I believe, for the feminine version of genius. But you could refer and tap into this inner genius, which I find is so much more interesting and inclusive than kind of saying, oh, you're either born a genius or you're not.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And I'm loving this comment here. You're on to something, Dirghayu, because Stefano is going to talk about situations like the pandemic. And, morally, I think creativity is the key to many things. Now, whatever that goal looks like for you, it's very personal, but there is definitely a way. And we are going to be talking about ways in which we can tap the creative. I see the muscle. Yes, we can tap that muscle. So, Stefano, I feel like we're getting these questions. So we need, yeah, exactly. So we need to talk about, before we talk about the different ways we can be creative, because that's the meat of this conversation, talk to us about the 4 types of creativity and how we only think about the top one.
Right. Yeah. So look, level 1. Now, these terms are going to sound a little infantile. They won't sound like they come out of academic literature, but they actually.
Is good. Infantile.
Yeah, infantile is good, isn't it? But it's Beghetto and Kaufman who wrote about this, and I believe they introduced it in 2007. And so the first level is actually referred to as mini C, which stands for mini creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And mini creativity is the level of creativity that we will often observe in children. You will see a child having this conversation all on their own or playing with their toys, and you can tell that they are doing something, or they will draw something that really doesn't make much sense to anybody else other than to the child in the moment. And that's what mini C creativity is. It's when you explore something, often for the first time, and it holds meaning. And it's a form of exploration, but it really only holds meaning for the individual.
It's interesting that you say that. It's because there was some research I read literally 5 days ago. I think it was on BBC. And it said that they've done some research over years, many, many years. And children, girls and boys, who were found to play with dolls, particularly dolls, it can be He-Man, it can be Barbie, doesn't matter. They turned out to have a lot more creativity and emotional intelligence.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because they're relating to different people and their problems when they play house.
How interesting. I've never heard that. I'm going to look into that, because that's, and I must say, and I'm not saying that, oh, that's right because I did this, but I used to play with my toys, and I used to have very intricate stories developing between the toys that I had. And I'm wondering if, does that, and I'm an only child, so I had to really spend a lot of time with my imagination, which kind of helps.
Yeah.
No, so that's the first level.
That's wonderful. So that's level 1.
That's level 1, mini C. The next level is little c, which is the creativity that everybody performs on a daily basis. The moment you wake up and you decide what shirt you're going to wear, that's a certain level of creativity. The minute you decide what you're going to have for breakfast, the minute you make decisions in your day, and you decide to, create your schedule for the week. These are levels of creativity because there's a lot of decision making going on. And of course, you're thinking in different ways. But of course, that's often not the kind of creativity that people will, cheer about or obsess over or glorify. Because this is the everyday creativity that we are already doing by default.
This is interesting. It's mundane creativity. And then you have people like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg who refuse to think about the maybe decision fatigue and wear the same shirt every day. What do you think about that?
Well, so someone mentioned it in the comments. I saw, well, what about those of us who have routines? And what would you suggest for routines? And so this is the dangerous thing about a routine. Routines have benefits. I like to call them rituals more than routines.
Yes.
Routines feels a little too constrictive for me, but that's personal. I think one of the greatest things you can do to explore your creativity is actually switch up those routines. If you always drive your vehicle a certain way to get home, take a new path. You do not know what you'll see along the way, and that could spark something in a moment. So whatever it is that you're doing, try something that maybe sets you a little out of your comfort zone, or just start switching things around a little bit, because a routine can become repetitive and you can get stuck in your ways. So for the everyday creativity, that's a great start. It's just, okay, what will I not do the way I'm always doing it, just for the sake of trying something new or changing up the
That's
routine?
interesting. For example, Rohan, if you have 6 p.m. Your tea every day, perhaps try a different type of tea, or perhaps switch the time. It doesn't have to be,
Or invite someone, or
or
say
invite someone.
I want to have tea with someone, even if it's virtual. I will not have tea alone today. I will have it with somebody else and see how that goes.
Yes. Okay, so this is what you
Yeah,
call. I'm going to let you take a sip because you've been talking a
I
lot.
want to sit. Yeah,
Please take a sip. I would love for you to
thank
give
you.
a bigger, little bit of an applause. Stefano's been up early. It's 8:15 for him, and taking out time from his hugely busy schedule to be with us today. So you more than deserve your coffee, my friend. Was that coffee?
It's actually water because the coffee has already been taken. This is why I'm here, because of
I
the coffee.
love, I love that you have water in such a fancy mug. You're
I
fancy.
do. Yeah, I have to have it. It feels like a little bit more fancy when I'm having water in this kind of a mug.
Yeah. Whatever you can do to increase the vibes. Okay, so we have
Yeah.
a quick recap. Two types. We have 4 levels of creativity. So for anyone who's just joining us, you guys are very welcome. Type 1 is what Stefano said is based on research, the mini C, which is the creativity you see in children, the way they play, the way they make games, dolls, etc. The big C is more grown up. What do I wear today? The day to day.
Actually, it's not big. It's little.
So it was mini, and the
It's
second one is
mini and
little.
little,
Got it.
which is interesting because there doesn't seem like there's much of a distinction there, but there is.
Well, there
Yeah.
must be a reason they've kept these names, right?
Yeah.
I'm guessing. Okay. And then the third one.
Now the third one is funny because it kind of steps away from the sizing, and it's called Pro C, which
Uh-huh.
refers to professional C.
Uh-huh.
And now many of us may have started to dive a little deeper into this because the moment that you have done a certain amount of mastery on anything, on your profession, on your industry, on your work, it puts you in a position where now you can start to think a little more creatively simply because you've been doing it for so long. You know the ins and the outs. So suddenly, you can start thinking in new ways simply because you have the experience. And so many of us, and most of us, will likely achieve a certain level of Pro C, and this is what we typically strive for in our careers. Pro C is a great place to be because I mean, mastery is an ongoing thing. It's lifelong learning. However, when you've done a certain amount of hours on something and you've really understood the inner workings, suddenly you start to see patterns emerge, and that's because you can now say, okay, what if I didn't do it the same way I've done it for so long?
Okay.
I'm seeing something new here.
Okay. Awesome. And so this is more when you start working then.
Or when you've been working for a little bit of time. So certainly, let's say you've been working in an industry even for as little of a few years, you've been doing a job in and out, you understand enough of it that now you can actually start to say like, okay, well, what if we did things differently? And often these are people who take the positions of leaders because they have visions and say, okay, we're going to do this, and they try to guide people into that direction. So, most of us are going to hit that level of Pro C to a certain degree at some level or another.
Yes, yes, I completely agree with you, and I want to challenge Jeff, if you're still with us, because I liked your comment and I liked the little joke that you created. What's the best way to get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. So, John,
Yes.
I want to say something here. I've always thought of myself as a non-creative person because I compare myself to people like my mom. Like, you give her an empty room and she'll decorate it and it's gorgeous and it's like Instagram, Pinterest worthy. And I don't get to, I don't care so much for colors, etc. So I've always said it loudly, which is a bad thing. Hey, I'm not creative, right? I said it out loudly. And then a couple of years ago, someone said, hey, your acronyms, which you are putting in your YouTube channel, they're so creative. And I'm like, creative? Me? So Jeff, you have a bunch of acronyms, including Namaste. I don't know how many other acronyms you do. It requires a level of creativity that you may not realize that you have.
Yeah. And again, this becomes a question of what are we labeling as creative and what aren't.
Exactly.
What are we dismissing or taking for granted that, hey, that's creativity as well?
Yes.
Certainly, if you're going to only judge artists as creatives, well, then you're excluding most of the population.
Exactly. So, Ruchi, whatever work you're doing, as long as you start working, because I'm guessing, Stefano, the pro C, the third one comes up when you start working professionally, not when you're thinking about being creative, but you're actually
No, it
doing
means
that.
it means you've committed to to some either vocation or line of
Yeah,
work, and so
got
you
it.
are in it every day, and it's beyond just the everyday creativity that we'll all
You
have
see,
happen by
that's it,
default.
Jeff. Thanks. THANKS. Treat humans as nature, natural
I love
kind spirit.
this. I
You
love
are a
this.
creative dude. You are a creative dude. Chapeau. Hats off. So
There we go.
fabulous. And the fourth one, Stefano?
The fourth one is the dangerous one because this is the one that we all glorify. It's actually the one known as Big C.
Uh-huh.
And
Why do
this
you
means
say dangerous?
dangerous because this is the one we will most often compare ourselves to.
Yes.
Big C is the level of creativity where we are changing paradigms, where we are quite literally shifting the way things were done, and it is receiving recognition. So when we think of these people, now we're thinking of all the greats, of all the great men and women who we know their name because they've done something incredible already. So, I often just ask people, who would you classify in this? And, I get so many incredible names. But, those the Elon Musks and,
Yeah.
they'll just throw everybody in there. They'll throw the Steve Jobs in there. And, of course, there's
Yeah.
incredible women as well. And
Yeah.
in different facets of
Yeah.
work, it's not all in the same. And it's dangerous because we're always comparing ourselves to Michelangelo.
Yes.
And this is what shuts us down. And what we don't realize often is also that those people who also achieve those levels of creativity, no one is saying they achieved those alone. Even Michelangelo, who painted the Sistine Chapel, had a team up there with him. And we forget this because we're so used to just seeing the final outcome and seeing all the wonderful things that come with great achievements. And I always remind people, keep in mind that we always think great achievements are the work of a soloist, of a great soloist,
Yeah.
but they are often the work of a great ensemble.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And Risto's recommending a book if you want to think like Leonardo da Vinci. I love it. And you know
Interesting.
what you're saying, Stefano? We always think this guy did everything, right? So whether it's
Yeah.
Michelangelo or Da Vinci or anyone else, it
Or
takes
Maya Angelou,
yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a village, right? However, I mean, even 400 years ago, they have some solid PR. This team because
Yes.
it's like, it looks like all the credit is coming to me. Okay,
Yeah,
we don't
absolutely.
know. We don't know the little people who helped him or her to get to where they are.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
fabulous. So these are the four C's. So please keep in mind that you're not always, so the mini, the daily, the professional, and the big. So do not compare your mini to someone's big. It is just,
Absolutely.
I can't believe I did this for so many years, comparing it to someone who's like my mom, who's like naturally gifted with things like colors and patterns, etc. So
Hmm.
with that said, let's talk about what are the different ways we can all be creative.
That's a great question. Well, for starters, the conversation that you and I are having right now is creative by default. We haven't planned what we're going to be speaking about, and things are just evolving, and people are, writing questions as we go, and we're referring to some of those and answering some of those. So you can see that sometimes one of the best ways to be creative is to first off do the things that you actually enjoy doing the most, but just challenge yourself to push that one step further or to do them a little bit more differently than you're comfortable with. So, I mean, it's very difficult because some people assume that when I'm saying be creative and that I'm going to suggest things like, well, what you need to be doing is you need to be sending out videos to potential employers to be hired, and that'll be creative. And the truth is, if you do not like creating videos, why in the world would you take that on? Now, you can try and see how you feel about it, because maybe you don't know how you feel about it until you try. But what I always suggest is list what it is that you already excel at, because you already have some experience there, and see how you could do something differently, or just be wild and try something completely new for the sake of trying something completely new.
Let's go there. Let's go there. Let's go to the wild.
Yeah.
So, firstly, for example, if I don't want to do video, I don't feel comfortable. I had someone on 3 months ago, and she talked about how to get better at video. It's not. it doesn't feel right, you can do it 10 times. If it doesn't feel right, don't force it.
Right.
And so Stefano is saying, for example, maybe I like writing. Okay, then write a little post, but you're saying plus it up a little.
Right. So now it's hard to answer how someone would do that, but the challenge I would say is, okay, so you've written 5 blogs, you're about to write the 6th one.
Yes.
Before you begin, what will make this blog different? Is it a question of structure? Is it a question of how you're presenting it? Is it that you're actually for the first time trying to tell a story rather than write more informative content? I mean, how are you going to make this blog completely different from all of the others so that you can actually start the blog by stating, I've intentionally tried to create a blog that is different than my last 5?
It's a powerful question. How can I make this one different? So fantastic. Stefano, just a very quick, I want to give a quick
Sure.
shout out because Momita has never joined us live. She's in Auckland, New Zealand, and they've just gone to winter timings and we've gone into summer timings. So now it's midnight for her. So she's like,
Wow.
it's bearable. So we have like California to Auckland. This is so amazing. So lovely that you guys are here. And you know, the thing that you just said, Stefano, there's no wrong answer.
There is no wrong answer,
There's
which
no
is
wrong
why
answer.
it's so difficult for me to take a position where I'm going to offer advice that I know most people will probably say that won't work for me. And so what I always say is you need to understand what makes you you. If
Yeah.
I presented you with a Venn diagram with just
Yeah.
3 simple circles,
Yeah.
what would those 3 words be that you insert that you know are going to define you? And if you can't answer that, who can you ask in your entourage that will say, oh, well, when I think of you, these are the 3 words that I think of. And it's incredible what you will find, because often those words will not match the ones you would have assumed people would say. And it's a great way to self-discover, you know, who you are. And then you say, okay, well, if that's what I'm acknowledged for and that's what I'm recognized for, of course, if you don't like something that you hear, you don't let that stick, you let that go, right? Then what can I do to kind of expand on that? Or how can I do that, you know, level that up a little bit? Wow, I'm really, they said that I'm a great storyteller. That's fantastic. I never realized I was a storyteller. Maybe my next blog should be done with a storyteller perspective here.
Yeah.
Maybe I can dip back into some of the experiences of my life. So when we're talking about strings,
oh, we got
right?
the props.
The strings that really, you know, define who you are, right, are what you can use to tie it all together. So your experiences are unique to you. So we like to sometimes tell people, like, we're not very unique. We're all kind of, you know, we're slightly different. We're variations. Not true. We've each had experiences. We've interpreted those experiences. What could you bring into whatever it is that you're doing that will do it? And I always do this intentionally. I make it point right to my heart. Because if it doesn't matter to you and it doesn't connect with you, then there's no point in pursuing something that someone else told you should pursue, you know? So this is just a fun little prop that I actually create, and I often use it, as you can tell. And so I remember we did this last time. So
yes,
I changed the strings a bit
you
to
did
make them more visible.
You did. They have a bit of a jute. They have a bit of a jute look and feel. I love it because you can see people like Risto who still remember the strings, full strings attached. So you know what we're talking about, Stefano. Is this what you would call some level of brainstorming?
You know what? We don't brainstorm enough.
We don't.
In fact, we've come to think that brainstorming means to think alone. It's actually very common for people to say, I'm going to brainstorm on that. And I always remind people that the originator, Alex F. Osborne, when he presented this over 70 years ago, by the way, we still haven't mastered brainstorming. His thinking was, collectively, we can generate more ideas. If you have more quantity, it's a numbers game. The odds are that you're going to have better quality ideas. And so what I find is a little bit of an issue is that we rarely try to kind of shake up our thinking. We often like to consult with people who we know are like-minded and will think a little more like us.
Yeah.
So what I say is, you have a challenge. Do you want to present yourself in a unique way? Do you want to present a blog or write a blog that is nothing like the last 5 you've written? Why don't you get 3 of your peers into a room and tell them, here's my challenge, and you know, let's just have a go at it. Let's have fun. I'll buy you guys drinks, or you can do this virtually, of course, now in these times. And it's a really fun way to also kind of build off of what other people are bringing to the table rather than just sitting within the pool of your own thoughts, which I've probably been with you for quite some time.
Yeah, no, you know what, and the other thing, Stefano, you've been in corporate, and I'm sure you've seen this as well. Our definition of brainstormings in companies is we all get together, lunch has been ordered. There's more braining than storming, which means there's a very rational side to everything. We have
Yes.
post-its. We put up post-its on the wall. We try to see patterns. First of all, what happens to those ideas? I have no freaking idea. Second of all, there is a little bit of very, how should I say it? There is sometimes a bit of subtle censoring going on.
Yes.
Um,
And I'm not so
John
sure
said
that it's,
that. John
I
said that.
wouldn't, yeah,
Just
I'm
because
not
John
even
said
sure
it.
it's that subtle, Sonal. I actually think it's actually very, in fact, it's why I created a mini course. And in fact, I also have a workshop on brainstorming within corporate settings alone, because I've recognized that we've had 70 years to master this. We're still doing it wrong.
We're still doing it wrong. We're still
We're
doing it
still
wrong.
doing it wrong.
And Jared, to your point, we're still hiring people who look like us, talk like us, think like us,
Yes.
walk like us, walk like
In
us.
a world where we're talking about, exploring diversity and being more open-minded to including other people, we're still doing a lot of the many things that we tend to do.
Yep.
And it's sad, but that doesn't mean that defines us. We can grow, we can evolve, we can get past this.
Yeah, no, I love it. And so brainstorming is a big one, and we don't mean brainstorming like we know. Just challenge the definition of brainstorming. And I think Jared is on to something here. So which is a good segue. So Stefano, what is the next way we can all be a little bit more creative?
So look, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, but I really believe fundamentally
we need repetition. We all need repetition.
Repetition, but there's nothing wrong with repetition.
Yes.
We also need to be a little easier on ourselves and less judgmental on ourselves. And so here's a phenomenon that I think most people don't realize. When we are finally having creative ideas, we tend to have a state of flow that develops. And we get very, very excited about our ideas. And what a lot of people don't realize is that whatever goes up must come down. So all of this adrenaline that's going on in our mind and the endorphins that have been sparked up by creative thinking, we usually experience a crash right after, where we will step back and look at our ideas and think, that's horrible. And so it's normal to have that crash come after a state of flow. And so what I often say also for creativity is have little bouts of creativity, give yourself some space, and then revisit and go back to it and have a look. And then be careful as to how quickly you share that with other people. Because if you share an idea in its infancy too quickly, anything they say can stifle your motivation, your excitement. And I often say, and it's actually someone else that taught me this, David Usher actually taught me this idea of almost protecting your ideas like they are embryos at the very beginning, and work on them and allow those to simmer in your own mind first. And only once you feel comfortable with the idea do you start to then, share it and see what other people are thinking.
I was literally going to tell you the metaphor I was thinking when you said that was a seed which has literally just been planted.
Yeah.
And people are saying, oh, how beautiful, look at the seed, let's put flour, let's put water, let's put fertilizer, and the seed died because it was premature to give so much attention.
Yeah, or people are just stepping way too close to the seed and they're trampling all over the earth, and you're like, I really need you guys to step back a second here. I need this to grow and to breathe a bit before I can expose it to the world. Of course, you will have to expose it to the world. You should be seeking feedback at some point, but in the very beginning, that idea is yours. Let it sit with you. Give it the honor of allowing it to simmer in your own mind.
Right. So, before we move on to the next way we can all be a little bit more creative, when you talked about brainstorming, Laura has a question here. So how do we break the paradigm of not brainstorming enough without editing ourselves in and out of corporate environments?
This is a big one. And it's in fact, again, I'll say that's why I created courses on this. And it's because what happens is there are so many psychological barriers that come into play when we're brainstorming in public. There is, first of all, social anxiety, which a lot of people experience just from being around people. There's a big one, which is evaluation apprehension. We're afraid to share ideas because of the judgment that may come from it. And so there are techniques. And some of those techniques are very simple. And in fact, remote work makes it even easier. For example, there's this one technique, if you all want to look it up, it's called electronic brain writing. And it's where basically people simultaneously and maybe even anonymously, which is a nice touch, post their ideas onto a board so that you're not being influenced by the other ideas that are coming onto the table, but you're also not feeling judged because the ideas are popping up, and it's a great way to get these ideas to pop up without having to worry about who is the most clever or who came up with what or who put some disruptive thinking up there that we're all against, but that really stretches our thinking. And so that's just one technique, but there are many as to how we can kind of go around these in-person barriers. Some people said to me, we can't use Post-its anymore, so I guess we can't brainstorm. And I'm like, you don't need Post-it notes. You really don't need Post-it notes. You don't need a common space either. And it's important for people to realize this. But I would say start small. And actually, that's kind of when I'm talking about the Creative Council. Yes. That's actually my smallest version of a brainstorming session, which is a great way to start if you want to maybe build up to having more intricate.
Tell us more about this, Stefano, because I'm detecting some very, very common truths out there that, KPIs, quick results are more important. So creativity takes a backseat. And I don't know if we have research about this, but I'm guessing the more creativity, the more room for creativity, probably the more profitability. But it's a long game, right? Not quick. Next quarter, you can't rush creativity, I guess.
Indeed. And also, there are different profiles, personality profiles and communication styles. Yeah. And if you're not necessarily being open-minded to those different styles, you're shutting some people out and you're not getting the best of everyone, coming to the table. And so I go through different profiles in some of my courses. Even having a contrarian is a great person to have because a little bit of tension and conflict will get us thinking in a new way. And if we understand where that person is coming from, we won't hold it personal. We won't take it personally. Yes, we won't hold it against them. And
exactly. And Aaron, if someone doesn't like to be challenged, it's just a question of, I don't know, I guess water, just sitting still for a long time. After a while, it just.
Yeah, absolutely. Stagnant water, very dangerous. Water, very, very dangerous. Yeah, absolutely.
So talk to us about the Creative Council.
So the Creative Council is something I suggest to people who want to start exploring brainstorming or people who recognize I really get stuck sometimes when it comes to trying to think of creative ideas. I'm just stuck. I just wish I could have something to get me a little bit closer to, exploring something. And so my Creative Council, I always say, could be composed, and I suggest that it's composed of 3 people. And the 3 people are 3 different kind of personality types that I classify, and I suggest that people try to aim to invite these 3 people. These are 3 people that you are going to invite, and when we were able to meet together, I used to say, invite them out for drinks or something and make it a little less formal and a little bit more casual. Yeah. And say, guys, I just need to, more than a sounding board, I want you to contribute here, And so the 3 people I say you aim for is one like-minded person, because we love people who are, thinking like us. And what's great about having someone who thinks like you is they will build off of your ideas and they will sustain your motivation and excitement.
Right.
So it doesn't hurt to have someone who thinks probably in similar patterns as you do. Okay. The second person, I say, invite a devil's advocate.
Yes.
Or a contrarian. Invite someone who thinks nothing like you think, or who is in a different industry, or who always seems to have a different perspective, because this will shake up your thinking, which can expose you to, new ideas that you can also, again, that person could say something, you're building off of this contrarian view. So the devil's advocate should not be shunned. They should not be avoided. In fact, bring someone in. If you have a level of respect with this person, then there should be no conflict that arises.
That's very important what you said, because I do see sometimes a contrarian or a devil's advocate. When the intention is not coming from the right
Yes.
place. And there is just, I want to drop this little firecracker in the conversation and I want to see where it goes. And then it becomes a full-fledged bomb, But the intention wasn't to help. It was to create trouble. Do you know what I mean?
True.
That
So
happens a lot.
those intentions need to be set clear in your
Yeah.
own mind first.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're going to bring someone that likes to kind of get a bit of shock value out of you or likes to push your buttons, maybe not the best,
Yeah,
choice.
I got it. So 3 types of personalities in your creative
Yeah.
council. What was the name of the first one? The champion?
The first one I say is just someone like-minded.
Like-minded.
The like-minded. The second one is the devil's advocate.
Yes.
Or the contrarian, depending on what people like. People will name them whatever they want to name them. The third one I call the wild card. You don't know what you're going to get. You should maybe try to include someone that maybe doesn't know you so well, so they won't tell you what you want to hear. It could be someone that maybe is, more of just an acquaintance rather than a friend or a coworker, or maybe someone from a completely different department, so that you don't really know how they think. But what you do know is we'll see where that goes. We'll see how this dynamic contributes to whatever it is I'm trying to get unstuck. So you're saying, guys, I need to brainstorm here. I want to present myself to potential employers in a new and creative way. Can you guys help me come up with some ideas?
Yeah. I think what the beauty of the wild card is the fact that if they don't know you, they have zero prejudice.
Yes.
And they don't have what do you call it? They don't have pressure to ensure you feel happy at the end.
Yeah.
They don't care about that. They're in it to help, but at the same time, if you don't want my idea, I'm out.
And they don't have a past to judge you on either, right? They don't know where you're coming from necessarily. So they won't say, well, I know the kind of work you're looking for already. So I'm going to try to steer you towards that. Well, what if that's not what I was looking for? What if what I needed right now is a change?
Perfect. I love this. So have a creative council, guys. We end this live stream today. Go and find 3 types of people for your creative council. Do it. It sounds like honestly, this sounds like a lot of fun.
It is.
I think I have a creative council without knowing that it was a creative council. And I do like the wild card because it helps to think about things that I have never in my wildest dreams thought about. So definitely enjoy that. And there was a question in there I want to get to. Stefano, so does dopamine deficiency play any role when you're in a bit of a creative funk?
So the dopamine deficiency is what will take place often right after we've had a creative outburst, because the dopamine levels increased and then they crash. So certainly you may have creative block following, moments where your dopamine was high. And so this is why sometimes we will go to a conference where there's a motivational speaker and they will be shouting things out. We get very, very excited.
Yes.
And then we walk away and we go back to our reality and suddenly we start to feel like, something is very wrong. So certainly there could be a little bit, but I often think creative block, I like to refuse to believe that it's even a real thing and say I know that I'm thinking that I'm blocked, but I know that I also have at my disposal ways to unblock myself in this moment. So certainly there's ways around it. If you feel that you're blocked, the counsel is one way. Giving yourself some space is another way. Believe it or not, that seems like you're not doing anything, but you are, and really just giving yourself that time for no judgment, just reflection without feeling that you need to accomplish something by a certain time. Sometimes we do, but to give yourself that space, we sometimes are so hard on ourselves. I need to come up with a creative idea by Friday, or this is not moving forward. Was that deadline imposed by yourself, or where's that deadline coming from? And often we impose those deadlines on ourselves rather than saying, okay, well, you know what? I bet this weekend I could come up with 3 people to use for a creative council to see how I'm thinking. Look, it could be one person if you really had to. Just jog up your thinking. But if you're always going to your significant other, you need to recognize I'm probably going to get similar thoughts. And they know me so well that maybe I should go for somebody, different. For a change.
Otherwise, you don't want to be stuck in an echo chamber.
That's right.
Echo chamber effect. And Risto, you're completely bang on. Yes, but compare it to yes and we're gonna get here, Stefano, because I was sharing with Stefano before we hit record. I have this video on YouTube which has gone crazy viral. It's about salary negotiation. You have to see some of the comments in there. Some of the comments are brutal. You don't understand, Sonal. You don't live in this country, or you're not from this industry. This is never going to work. And a new friend of mine on LinkedIn, he called it, his name is David Lee, and he said, this is called arguing for your limitations.
Yep.
This is not going to work because what if we convert that to exactly what Risto said? What else? This is one of the most powerful questions that you can learn when we are learning to be coaches. Stefano and I have a certification, and we were going through this. This is one of the most powerful questions you can ask.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first thing I say is, so what? So someone says, oh, this will never work. So what?
Yeah.
Why does this mean something to you? I'm the one doing it. I'm in the arena, right? I'm the one daring greatly, to quote some Brene Brown, in the arena. You're up in the audience and you're shouting at me. You're shouting at what will work and what won't. No, you can come into the arena if you want, but I'm in here. So what? It won't work. Maybe it won't.
Stefano, I have to tell you, as a human being, it feels it's very tempting to respond. And I'm like, hey, I have thousands of DMs that it has worked. Put in your own personality, your own color to it. And my husband has to tell me, calm down, like don't engage, because they are looking for trouble. So it's like, that negativity spiral.
Yeah.
It's just going down.
Yeah. And you got to ask yourself then, what can you control? And what you can control is how you'll react. And quite honestly, what is the intent of these people? I mean, if I went to the zoo today, and as I'm strolling through the zoo, one of the monkeys starts to fling pebbles at me, I wouldn't spend an hour conversing with the monkey, explaining as to why that's inappropriate and how it does not, it shouldn't be throwing pebbles at me. Do you know who I am? It would be ridiculous, right? You'd be like, are you spending time and energy arguing with a monkey? When someone tries to attack someone, especially if they're doing it under an anonymous cloak, why are we giving them any of our time and energy?
Next time anybody gets trolled, any of you guys watching, including me, I have to remember, next time anybody writes something mean, you got to ask yourself, is it worth monkeying around?
Monkeying around. Love it. I guess that's what I could have chosen any animal, but I chose a monkey. But monkeys are silly and they'll do that kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah. And sometimes human beings can be silly as well. So bouncing off of that. So Stefano, what else?
Yeah. My favorite coaching question, you engage someone in a conversation, you do some intellectual sparring, you get them to stimulate their thinking. You ask them for options, like, well, what options do you see for yourself? How can you be different? How can you be more creative? They come up with one option and they stop. And you're like, okay.
Yeah.
Any other options? And then they come up with two more and they're really proud of themselves now because they gave themselves two more. And at the end of that, where it's feeling like, let's wrap this up, my favorite question, okay, what else?
What else?
And in a brainstorm, again, quantity is important. So it's great to have a few more ideas, and there always is more than one idea. There's always more than five, no matter what the situation. And those who challenge me on this, because sometimes people are like, I'm not so sure about that. Look at design thinking exercises, where it quite honestly sometimes looks like there is no solution. And then finally out emerges a solution. You're like, wow, it was right before me and I couldn't see it. And then they say, oh, and there's these other 5 ways of also doing it. And you're like,
yeah.
Which is why it's always important. What else?
End. Exactly. Anusha, there is no end. You can ask this in any situation, I think, in your professional life, as well as your private life. Hey, G, this is amazing. Stefano's amazing. If you're not following him, I definitely encourage you to follow him. And you're getting a lot of fan mail here. And yes, Lee, I did a monkey impression. I cannot believe I did it while you were talking. So, what else, Stefano? So going back to your question, because I know that we have a couple of other ways that you can share with us. And we saw you doing a few things with your strings.
Oh, yeah.
How can we use that approach when we are in a bit of a creative funk?
Yeah, well, I say props, but often, I think the beauty of a prop is that it forces you to have to think of a representation to depict something that you're going to have to somehow create to depict you. So for example, I'm always, when I do my mini courses or my workshops, I'm always taking out props and I'm explaining the brain and where we have blocks. And I mean, I have endless props. I love to just always explain things. Sometimes I've got silly props to explain concepts. But if I were
to show that, because I'm a little hungry actually.
This is what I do in a workshop right when it's time for the break. I kind of tell people, like, I bet you want one of these. And of course, I created these. But these can be printouts that you get online. But what's really powerful about it is the minute you are forced to have to see something visually or touch something physically, it changes the way you think. So when we're thinking, let's say, of applying for a job and you're like, I really want to find a creative way to describe myself that isn't generic.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is, rather than trying to write down a sentence, what 3 props could you find in your space right now that define who you are?
Okay, I'm going to repeat that. So for job search, particularly, all of the things we've talked about today are applicable to situations like career, job search. Creativity is not, I want to repeat, it is not a monopoly of advertising companies and website development and all that stuff. Creativity belongs to all of us. Now, in job search, Stefano just said, what 3 props can you use to describe who you are? You're making us think.
I'm not suggesting that you even have to use those props while you're applying, but for you to start to reflect and to start to think. Now, look, it depends what industry you're in. You could say, hey, by the way, you know what? I thought I would do something a little different. I actually thought of what defines me, and I found 3 props that represent me. I'd love to take the time to explain it to you.
Can you please explain the 3? Because it might spark a little bit of creativity, if you know what I mean.
Of course.
For us, and inspiration for us as well.
Of course. And you know, that person, look, it's not going to guarantee you a job, but what I can say is that person will probably walk away and say, now that must have been one of the most interesting interviews and approaches that I've ever seen someone display. That really was actually, and quite honestly, who knows? You're very likely going to have that person calling you back and saying, like, that was interesting.
We want to be memorable. At the end of the day, what we want is to be memorable. What we want is to be talked about. So give us some examples of props that you use to say, this is Stefano Di Lollo.
Wow. You know what? That's great. I've actually never really thought about it. But, you know, I actually have some props here. They're not maybe the props that if I was doing this on my own, but they are props in my environment. And I love using things in your environment. Yeah. So the first thing is this, actually, that I love, which I know most of you can't. It just looks like a circle here, right? It doesn't look like much, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Magic. I love uncovering the magic that I find within other people. So once upon a time, my focus was always on uncovering my own magic and being the performer. And it's shifted now. And now I'm much more interested in seeing what's inside. And usually that's in somebody else. So this is one prop that I would describe, especially from a coaching perspective. I love finding the magic in others. And there's always magic in others. And so sometimes we ask the common question, you know, the coaching question, if you had a magic wand, what could you do? So this is why magic for me is an important prop.
I love it. I was half expecting a rabbit to come out of there, but
you know what? I'm not sure where he went. He probably went to grab his next cup of coffee. There usually is one in there.
Oh, he's been exhausted after Easter. Actually, he's taking a break.
Yeah, I would say. Look, I would say this pencil is a powerful thing. Why? To me, this represents the ability to think of what's in your mind. I love learning, but I also love creating. And so for me, this represents all of that, the learning, the creating. And third, hey, I would actually use, I don't know if I can actually grab this and put it in front of the camera. I would say this microphone right here. And it's not because we're doing a live right now, but rather because I feel the need to express myself. And I love using the ability to connect with other people with whatever means, maybe a piece of technology, to express. I'm not keeping this to myself. And so those 3 things are props that I just used in my space. And I didn't have to work really hard to tell that story because it's authentic. I mean it. I wasn't kind of trying to come up with something clever. It's just, that's who I am.
Yeah. There is no, what I love is there is no wrong answer here. Whatever sparks creativity in you. And there is no, like, the idea of even taking a prop and saying this kind of talks about who I am, that already elevates you to a level of stickability which others don't dare
That's
to
right.
do, because it's a little bit away. And Jared, I love this. So the Dia de los Muertos, he has a little statue, and a Little Prince is a classic. My kids have read it, and I think I enjoyed it more than they. It was a bit too advanced for them. There is no end. Everything that you are thinking makes you creative. It does, right? It does make you
It,
creative.
it does. It does. I mean, and I'm seeing Jared asking, does it count the things that I found? Of course it
Yeah,
counts, because
yeah,
it means something to you. And as long as
yeah.
we can provide context and explain, if I would have put a magic hat here without explaining, people would be like, what in the world is he talking about? But of course I had thinking behind it. And so, yes, absolutely. All of
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah,
things
yeah.
that
And
we can all work on it right now. Like there's no stopping you.
there's no stopping. And I don't see the name here, but it's a good point. Brainstorming, like we said earlier in the earlier part of the if you watch the replay, we do need ideas to germinate a little bit and develop
Yes.
before we say it's ready for brainstorming, because brainstorming means people are stepping all over it, and it's a little seed today.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing, I don't know the context of this question, but it's a very good question.
I love this here. What I'm seeing,
Yeah.
I'm seeing creativity takes time to develop.
Yes.
So I work for a company. I'm the VP of leadership development for Papillon, which means butterfly. And the idea here is that we all need a cocoon for a while to develop so that we can emerge
There
and
you
take
go.
flight.
There
You
you go.
know,
The best prop I
so
can think of is the little cocoon, and then it becomes a chrysalis, and then
absolutely. So we sometimes feel that we don't have that time. Well, we should be taking that time.
it was Bob in Boston. Hey, Bob, great to see you. So this is fantastic, and we've talked about so many different things. Have a creative council, do some brainstorming, but more storming than brain, less rational, more crazy.
Yeah.
And we talked about having different types of people in your creative council. If you joined us late, highly firstly welcome, but highly suggest you watch the replay. We're 3 minutes before the end, before the top of the hour. And then I want to talk about this. I think somebody mentioned it already. Talk to us about forced scarcity or forced constraints and what it does to creativity.
Yeah. So a conversation that I often have with people, especially when I was consulting in teams, trying to get people to be more creative, people would say, we would be more creative if.
If there was no COVID, if there was no COVID.
If there was no pandemic. And someone mentioned earlier that the pandemic, they've seen a lot more creativity emerge. And that's exactly why, because of what I'm about to talk about. I would be more creative if only I could afford some of these fancy softwares that allow us to do creative things. I would be more creative if I had more time. I would be more creative. And of course, we're focused on all of the things that we don't have. And take it from me. I used to lead design departments and creatives. And often you'd hear this from the creatives, we don't have this. And if we had this kind of a software, this kind of technology, we would do it. And every time I said, okay, I will pull strings, and I will make it happen. And I gave it to the team. Never did I see creativity boost up and jump. Because we are probably way more creative when we need to work with what we have, when we are looking for the opportunity to be resourceful. And what I say is take that one step further.
Yeah.
Force yourself to work with what you have.
Yeah.
Say, okay, when you asked me to come up with props, and now of course I'm somewhat equipped here, but the question is, don't go out and buy props. Don't say I could do that if I had props or if I knew how to draw and cut things out. No. You work with what you have. And I dare you to say, you've got 5 minutes to find 3 props in your environment right now. Good luck. You will walk away.
Well,
there we go. That's a very common prop nowadays.
Exactly. Something lying around, whatever is lying around, it's there. It's there. You don't even have to try it. It's there.
And the question is, it's not so much the prop, but rather the reflection that goes with why does this prop in this environment make sense that it represents me?
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, okay, so you said, I'm going to give myself 2 weeks to write this next blog that's going to be unique when compared to all these others. And I'm writing this blog because I'm hoping that a potential employer will see it. Why are you giving yourself 2 weeks? That's a lot of time. I challenge you. You have 24 hours.
24 hours. Go for it.
Or 2 days, even 2 days.
Yeah.
Constrain yourself. Don't assume that because you had more time that your idea would have been more creative. In fact, I guarantee you, you will likely come up with more creative ideas when you are desperately looking around or trying to figure out what you need to do. And
yeah. Stefano, this makes perfect sense. And I'm going to ask you this question. It's a little bit of I'm trying to make sense, because on one hand, we said sometimes when we have deadlines, and these are self-imposed deadlines, they can kill creativity, right?
Yes.
We said that earlier. And now what we're saying is constraints can actually breed more creativity. So talk to us about it, because it feels a bit contrarian here.
Well, so sometimes we're thinking of something big here, though. We're thinking like, I need to completely redefine my personal branding image by Friday, or I'm not applying for any of these jobs. And so, of course, this is something that I would say, well, hold on a second here. Does it make sense to take on something so large that really defines a lot about you in such a small period of time? And why is it that you won't apply for these jobs? Like, who is saying that you can't apply for these jobs on Monday? You know, so there's a careful balance. You also know yourself. Do I procrastinate and I gave myself 2 weeks, and in the end, I'm still only working on the last 3 or 4 days of that deadline? You know, a lot of us do that, right? We give ourselves more time. That gives us comfort in the moment. And then here we are in the same scenario.
I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love my last minute. I don't know why it fuels me. Like, if I know there's 2 weeks to go, I'm like, I'm going to watch Netflix.
Yeah. So sometimes what I say is, you know, give yourself that pressure when you feel that it's like, I typically don't give myself pressure. Force yourself, and not so much always like, I mean, time is one of those tricky ones, you know, because time, different people treat it very differently. But I'm even meaning like in terms of money, like, well, if I had money, I would put up a self-promotional website. Okay, so my question would be, but you are claiming that you don't have the money. What else? What now?
What else?
You know, and so the question is, well, first thing the person will say, well, how could I have a website up? And the next thing is, okay, if it wasn't the website, what would you do to represent yourself that would maybe have the same, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I kept thinking of how I needed a website. Okay, well, what if you didn't need a website?
Yeah.
What would the first step be?
Yeah.
And suddenly it changes your thinking. But if you remain trapped in, I need money so that I can have a website, you're going to be stuck.
Yeah. No,
so I say impose that constraint and say, okay, no website.
Yeah.
We're removing that. You clearly don't have it, because you're going to spend a lot of energy and time complaining about what you don't have, rather than using that energy into the creativity of solving your issue.
Yes.
So it's a redirection. So sometimes I say, you know, I used to do this. Sometimes I used to look in my house and I used to say, I want to redecorate this area. I would love to have a shelving unit there, but I want something creative. The first thing I would think of doing is going onto Amazon or checking to see what's out there. And I'd see the pricing and I'd say, oh, that's so expensive. Then I would say, okay, you are going to go to that tiny little hardware store down the street that barely has anything ever, you know, that has very limited stuff, and I am going to walk out of there with a creative project that I can put up. And I'm going to work with whatever I can find there, and that's what's going to make it fun. You would not believe that you will walk away with an idea that is far more creative, because you found ways of being resourceful and working with what was at your disposal already, rather than thinking that you needed, you know, all of the works.
Love that.
So force it, you know, force yourself. If you were thinking of writing a book and you've been delaying writing a book, then I would say you need to write 10 pages by this week, by the end of this week. And whatever comes out, comes out. If it's junk, it's junk, but you're writing. And if that means you need to write 10 minutes every day until you get there, so be it.
Wonderful. I love it.
You know, it's a constraint.
It's a constraint, and it definitely makes perfect sense. And some of us need a little bit of discipline, because our creativity can go a little too wild.
Very much so.
Sometimes a good thing, but you do need to rein it in a little bit. And the last one, because I see we're over the hour, we're just going to couple of minutes over. Is that okay for you, Stefano?
Of course.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome. You have this word, and you love this word, and tell us about this. It starts with J, and you say it's one of your favorite words, and you would love to use it in a sentence. So use
Yeah.
this word for us in a sentence.
Yeah. So okay. Wow. That's now I have to because I was just gonna say my word. I'm trying to find a way to juxtapose what I was talking about before with what I want to talk about now. No, I just
You
didn't.
did it.
So
You did it.
juxtaposition, I think, is one of the most powerful tools. It's when you take two things that don't really seem to be linked to have any relevance, and you basically bring them together, a forced union of two things that don't typically go together. And this is a great way of thinking of ideas. If you are thinking of what makes you unique when you're applying for work, or what's your special flavor, what's your superpower, I would say, well, what else do you like to do? And someone say, oh, well, I also like gardening. Okay, can we juxtapose those two together for a second? Tell me what it is about gardening that mimics how you are unique in the workforce. You know, gardening has nothing to do with work in a sense. It does in some ways. But you take these two ideas and you bring them together, and all of a sudden now you can write a blog. You can just tell a story and explain the links, the powerful links. It's why I think coaches love metaphors and idioms and analogies, because that's what those are. They're juxtaposition. They're two things that you're comparing that really don't have much to do with each other. And so when you're trying to generate ideas, I actually say force juxtaposition sometimes. You know, think of two completely separate things that don't have anything to do with each other.
Yeah.
And try to force them together.
Yeah.
The results can be outstanding. And in fact, if you look through history,
yeah,
so many great ideas were actually the combination of two things. I mean, someone could even argue, and I don't know if people are going to get angry at me that I'm glorifying something like a mobile device, but it was the juxtaposition of a camera, of a computer, and of a telephone. I mean, that's how we come up with things. If you look at, I'm going to do something a bit more comical here. If you look at, Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes.
Johnny Depp's character, Jack Sparrow.
Yes.
If you ask the actor, how did you come up with this character? How do you play that role? He actually says that he basically combined Keith Richards and Pepe Le Pew.
I don't know who the second one is.
Pepe Le Pew was the romantic skunk from the Warner Brothers series, where he's always kind of trying to be a bit of a romantic, but always. So he took the romantic kind of rough around the edges approach of the skunk with the very Keith Richards. And if you look at these two, you will actually understand that he actually juxtaposed these two characters in order to actually figure out how to play this new character. And so juxtapositions, you often want to combine things that you wouldn't think are related. And we did that even with the props. Yeah. That's a form of juxtaposition. What in this room represents me.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And we think so alike. It's hilarious, like really funny. A few weeks ago, I made this video 2 years ago, but it's all about when somebody says, why should we hire you? And I literally had a geeky little Venn diagram, exactly the way you explained it. And one of the things that makes you unique, I said, is there's a few things that you do that others don't do, even if they are a little bit unrelated. For example, I'm interested in analysis. I'm a financial analyst, and I also love writing.
Yes.
Okay. So this means you can synthesize extremely complicated information into simple English in a blog or an article or whatever, and people can understand it. So there's something we may not have dug a little, deep yet, but it's worth thinking about. And I never called it this. Now I love it. It's fancy. Juxtaposition.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the first time I read about juxtaposition, they showed a picture of the American President Nixon and Elvis Presley together. And they said this was a great example of juxtaposition because very different people that were at I believe at a conference together, like holding hands or something. So I don't think it's the best example. I would prefer to use other ones, but that was the image that remained in my mind.
Wow. Fabulous. We've covered so much today. So if you guys have joined us late, highly recommend that you watch the replay. And I'm going to do a very, very quick recap. We talked about how anyone and everyone can be creative when it comes to their career, their job search, just challenging a little bit about how you think, no matter what you think about your constraints in terms of you're not creative. We talked about four types of creative, which is, I think, I'm glad we spent a lot of time on it because we always tend to compare to the big, the professional type of creative.
Yeah.
And then, so the four levels of creativity, and then different techniques, different ways, different hacks of how we can all be creative. You talked about a creative council, and I love the three types of people that you should have in your creative council. My favorite was the wild card, but I never realized that like-minded. I used to think like-minded people will result in an echo chamber effect, but what you're saying
Mm.
is they help because they build up on what you already said,
Yeah.
and they motivate you, which is what we need when we're going through a stage, a phase of brainstorming, or whatever. And contrarian, of course, goes without saying. If we didn't have contrarians out there, we would have yes men, yes women, nothing would get done.
That's right. That's right.
So fabulous. So then, creative council, brainstorming, more storm than brain, juxtaposition, which we just talked about, using props, forced scarcity, forced constraints, and when you're feeling stuck, asking what else and what else. Oh my gosh, this has been enormous. Like, I am like stupefied. I'm like actually speechless, and I talk a lot, but I really honestly like don't know. So we're like, yeah, there's so many great comments in there. So I highly recommend that you follow Stefano on LinkedIn as well as Instagram, where all his brilliance sits in one place, which is on Instagram. And Stefano, before I let you go, a little bird tells me that you're coming up with some courses, some interesting stuff. Can you talk to us about
Yeah, absolutely. We're relaunching live learning courses. They're mini courses. And so we had such a great reaction to the first round that we're bringing them back. And I've even added some. There's one on brainstorming in there. And there's also one that focuses on design thinking applied to leadership, which kind of dives a little bit back into the brainstorming.
it?
I'm really excited about them. They're starting as of April 21st.
Okay, amazing. So if you want to know more information about that, whether it's your company, you want your company to look into it, or yourself, definitely go and connect with Stefano on LinkedIn. So Stefano, this has been huge fun, learning as
It has.
always, exactly like actually better than I expected. So, and thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who was here today, because it's a lot more fun. With people who are listening and who are engaged.
Yes.
So thank you so much, everyone. Take care of yourselves and see you next Friday.
Bye, everyone.